I'm really grateful to have you both for this conversation. To someone who's hearing you for the first time, seeing you for the first time if you're watching the one on video, but like, how would you like to introduce who you are?
I think I would primarily identify as an activist, I guess, which is I think something that we'll get into. An activist who maybe sometimes writes. I wouldn't say I'm a writer. Who cares about various social issues, including race, which we, obviously wrote about, the environment, gender, class.
I guess I would introduce myself as a creative and writer whose works revolve around social issues, mainly like race, gender, and class. Yeah. But I also have, I guess, like kind of this habit of also then like, I also work in marketing. It's my
Yeah, it's true.
It's the ingrained, let's describe ourselves our profession, right?
Yeah.
There's a discipline of like, let's not name the professional thing first, although that is a part of me, which I like. But yeah, like what are the other chances you get to say the other parts of you, right? So like when you say you're a creative, like that resonates with me because I would identify myself as a creative as well. But that's not the first identity I usually put on the table because I'm known for so many other things. But in my heart, one of my heart identities is I'm a creative.
Nice.
Yeah, and when I hear you, Kristian, describe yourself as an activist, like I wonder, like, am I an activist? Do I have that in me, or do I no, I don't want to call myself that, like, because I don't think anyone would identify me as one, and I don't.
Right.
And it's also like that interesting, like, why do I have that relationship with that word?
Yeah.
Yeah. But well, if you're listening to this, you obviously are getting a little bit of sense of where this conversation is going to go. But yeah, thank you for that rich introductions of who you are. Maybe I'll set the table by saying I really wanted to talk to you both because I see you both, I identify you both as you're younger millennials, cusp of Gen Z, you're kind of like at the borderlines of like these two younger generations that older generation people would say like, I don't understand how they think. Why do they see that as a big deal? And I'm hoping that this becomes a little bit of an intergenerational conversation that maybe we don't know how to have, but yet we want to have, right? So let's kick off with like a very big question that I wanted to ask you right off the gate. I always think it's like a bit odd that not odd bad, but like odd question mark that when we say the pledge, right? And the pledge is whole like we the citizens of Singapore pledge ourselves as one united people, right? Because we want to be united. Regardless of race, language, or religion, right? To build this democratic society. And it's beautiful. I love the pledge. It was also written a long time ago. And I'm wondering how it resonates for a younger generation. Like, do those words still make sense to you? Like, does it, if we want to promise to be a united people, are we going to be more united by regarding less of those identities or regarding more of those identities? And that's like the big fat question I'm putting right at the start. Yeah. How does that pledge sit with you today? Yeah. Does it help us to stay united?
The pledge is an ideal. It's almost like a utopia to me, right? That's what we want to achieve. But if you were going to be realistic about it, we're not there yet. Right, and I think the cracks are beginning to be a bit more obvious over time, and I think that's I guess my generation would be like, I think it's time we address the cracks, right? Like water is seeping through the cracks, and we see the water level rising, and at some point, are we just gonna let it be and drown, or are we gonna like take actions towards it? Not to say that we don't appreciate the pledge, right? But I think maybe our generation might be a little bit more realistic as well, right? To current situations or like, dynamics on the ground that we want to address.
So if I could get you to lean a little bit in your identity as a creative and a writer, right? How might you, if the pen was in your hands, how would you rewrite a practical version of the pledge if we want to stay united? Okay, we're not saying we're going to replace the pledge. We're not saying the pledge is bad. We're saying like as a creative experiment, right? How does the pledge actually sound like in daily practice? Like if I, as a citizen of Singapore, want to be united with the rest of you crazy peeps in Singapore, right? Am I going to get there by regarding less of your stuff or regarding more of your stuff? Like how would you say it in your words? How would you?
I say my words.
How would you pledge? Yeah.
We want to be able to like live in harmony, or that's what like people say.
Yeah.
But there's always that I think other angle where we don't acknowledge the differences, right? And I think living in a country where like you have people of different races, different religion, acknowledging that differences is important.
Yeah.
I think this idea of like, Singapore identity, right? And if you kind of like squish everything into one, it becomes monolithic, which is not necessarily a great thing. Yeah, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be, like proud to be Singaporeans, but I think the beauty of being a Singaporean is that yes, this country has many different like identities, and we should kind of like embrace it without, I think. Erasing any part of it, or trying to like force everyone into this like perfect box when when clearly the pieces are not like matching. So I think to answer your question, if I were to like as a creative experiment, probably I think emphasize more on the like different identities, and essentially I think that's what makes us Singaporeans really, what makes up I think what we understand of the core essence of this country, right?
Just want to riff off you, and you can tell me like no, that's not it. Does it sound like the daily reality is more like if I as a citizen of Singapore want to commit to being united with the rest of people in Singapore, and I got to respectfully regard more of your race, your language, your nationality, your, I suppose, fill in many, many blanks. Right? So is that true for you?
I think so, yeah, in some sense, right? Because I think when we talk about, like regardless of race, language and religion, we are assuming that everyone has the same, it's on the same like playing field or the same level, which is not the case, right? And I think this resistance to like acknowledging it, is what is like pushing us back.
Right. So not resisting acknowledging the differences. I guess if we resist naming the differences, or like, woo, let's not talk about the differences, it actually has a secondary effect that we are not going to apply, which is disunity.
Yeah, right. And then like not understanding it is what I think reproduces a lot of this like stereotypes you have for people, or misunderstanding, because there's no conversation, so it's more of hearsay. This is what I grew up listening, from, let's say, the elders around me about someone from another community, right? And we kind of like listen, we assume that it is what it is, right? And then it just keeps reproducing, and the cycle never ends.
Got it. Kristian, I'd love to hear your hot take. You look like you are like,
I don't have a hot take. I mean, I guess I'm thinking about like either saying like despite of or because of our race, language, or religion. I think the idea, and this is really just what Mysara was talking about, right? I think it is you have to like regard more in order to regard less to some extent. Like I think it's not about trying to avoid or put aside these differences, because the reality is that there are differences, and the reality is that I think there are a lot of different things that go into constructing the differences, and like we cannot necessarily avoid that. And I think that's kind of why also a lot of younger generations are trying to talk about these differences. And I think we are accustomed to thinking that we have like, I don't know, moved past differences or that the differences don't necessarily matter. And I think that is what's coming into tension, where I think there are people who maybe are trying to resist the idea that we actually do have, tension. And I don't mean tension in like, I'm not putting like a value judgment on the word tension, because tension can be productive, can be good. I think maybe we are accustomed to thinking that we must, I don't know, erase or put aside our differences in order to be united. But I think, I don't know what I think about, and I think what a lot of like younger people think about is how do we create unity by actually acknowledging the differences.
I mean, this is really like fascinating to me. So a lot of schools today, one of the core skill sets that the educators have to learn to engage with the new movements of society is this thing called polarity thinking, right? And polarity thinking is just a fancy way of saying like we need to think more in both and rather than either or, right? Because long story short about polarities, it's like there are two ideas which are equally good but sounds very opposite. That's why we very often think it's an either or, but actually it's both. So when I'm listening to both of you unpack this, like, hey, we need to acknowledge the differences. We can't just paper over it. It makes me hear it as like, right now our country is in like sort of a tension, right? Like, should we regard more about our differences or should we regard less of our differences? And the answer is actually both. I'm hearing it from both of you that we need that conjoining almost, right? That and there's almost a sequencing from what I'm hearing, that you first need to regard more about how I'm different from you so that you can begin to regard less of those differences over time.
Yeah. I also don't necessarily think it's like I don't think it's a totally brand new thing, this both and mentality also within Singapore also, I think. And this is not to like say like, oh, things were, like very, very good back in the day or whatever. But I don't know, I always anecdotally hear from like my parents or like my grandparents also when we're thinking about like language, for example, right? Like my dad, I think, can speak quite a few dialects. Chinese dialects while also then speaking Tamil and Malay, and like I think a lot of his community, a lot of people around his age, knew that like I can speak to my Chinese auntie neighbor because she can speak Malay. She can't speak English, for example, right? But I can speak Malay, so I can like converse a bit, even though my Malay is damn bad. But and I think I don't know. I feel like it's also kind of like sad in a way that I think a lot of younger Singaporeans actually don't really have that sort of, to my mind, the same sort of like grasp of different languages. I think a lot of people know like Japanese more than they know Malay in Singapore, which I think is saying something else. But like I think, and I think so. I feel like there was like a mentality or impulse for this like both and maybe back in the day lives, right? But like I think there was sort of like and I think that spirit is not new to us. So I think it is also about seeing how we can maybe try and rediscover that within our history and bring it back and reintroduce that, I think, a little bit. So
I was listening to this podcast about polarity thinking yesterday, and the guy who founded polarity thinking was just sharing that it's very hard for people to digest that all values have a partner value. They come in a pair, but we tend to focus on the value that we value. And if we don't have a healthy relationship or an awareness that it comes in a pair, then we may tend to think the other is like bad versus like actually you kind of need it as a counterbalance. So when I hear of like, say, people reacting to, younger people, saying like, oh, we need to talk about this identity and that identity and that identity, and you need to appreciate that this is how different I am from you. They see it as an affront to like, hey, why don't you be all harmony right now? Let's be all unity right now. And I mean, I would love for us as a country to actually recognize like the desire for harmony needs to also embrace the desire for difference. Yeah, to actually accept like both. And it's not harmony, disharmony, but it's like harmony and differone I don't know. Yeah, but at the risk of like turning this into like this, like, whoa, this like academic discussion, right? one of the things that intrigues me about both of you, like as you came together to write your book, is it is like front and center, aside from all those identities about race or about the creative thing or the activist thing, right? That you wanted to talk about in your book. You actually began it with your identity as friends, right? And I think that is such an underrated identity, right? So to help us explore maybe like the idea of friendship and how we can use friendship as a way to unite us despite our differences. So what has your friendship taught you about the identity of being a friend?
Brown is Redacted also started from the play that or the performance lecture that we put together, Brown is Haram. And I think if we, I mean, I can assume, I'll speak for both of us a little bit for a while, but I think if we had tried separately to write our own Brown is Haram performance lecture script, I think it would look radically different. And I also don't even know if I could have personally done it by myself. I think it's not... I don't know, like I think talking about myself just in a vacuum, also talking about my lived experiences in a vacuum is not, I don't know, as, well, it's not as fun, but also not as like productive or like like artistic also, I guess, as putting it beside someone else who, you know, I guess has maybe parallel lived experiences, but also wildly different to a great extent. So how do those two things come together, right? Come together and produce, like I said, tension, right? But like I think very good tension. And I think that is what like friendship does, right? There is moments of, I think, beauty that comes out of like the kinds of conversations, right? And conversations fundamentally about two people. It cannot be like you cannot have a conversation necessarily just, you know, with one person. And so like, I think for me, I think the friendship, at least the friendship with Mysara has, I think, taught me a lot about myself, but also I think about how, for example, obviously the subject matter being race primarily, kind of how different people think about race. And it's really, I think, opened my eyes to then I guess my own thoughts about race broadly and how that's evolved. I think Mysara has had such a instrumental role in my journey also, I guess.
Wow. Yeah.
I think to add on what Chris has said, there's also that, you know, I think we've been friends for like 3 years now. And along the way, there's also that validation. Because I think a lot of part of conversations, whether it's like our own personal conversations or part of the book, was the relationship between brown men and brown women, right? That kind of dynamics.
Yeah.
And I think over time, we kind of validated our experiences, you know. I think beyond the book, you know, Chris also has given me a safe space, you know, like in a sense, it's one friend, you know, we have like, I think what people call like a low maintenance friendship, like we don't hang out all the time, but you know, like he knows like if he needs me, I'm there. If I need him, then he's there. And along the way, I think over the 3 years, we've kind of like opened each other up to our own circle. So I've met his friends, his partner, you know, he's met my friends and stuff. So
she's hung out with my mom one-on-one.
Yeah, I'm friends with his mom. Yeah, you know, like texting basis. So, you know, and I think that's also important, especially when you're doing like work that is it can be very emotionally taxing, you know. I think it's important to do it with someone you feel safe around. So I think I really appreciate that. Like I think Chris and our friendship has, you know, beyond, you know, teaching me this, you know, like exploring this idea of like race in Singapore, but also I think taught me a lot about myself. I think that's something that I really value in our friendship.
I'm just so struck by so many things that you said, that, you know, how do two people come together, right? How do two people come together? And I'm hearing that they come together through an an offer of validation, through an offer of holding a safe space, through an offer of let me open up your world to my world. Let me open up your world to who I know, And that's sort of like the dream, right? Of how a people can be united in a very kind of like country, right? Like, how can we begin with those baby steps by, is it possible for me to see you as a friend? Like even just to wear that temporary identity for a while, like how would we treat each other if we treated each other as a possible friend?
Yeah.
Like what, I was so struck, Chris, when you said like, if I wrote the book by myself, if I did a one-man show version of like, Brown's Haram, it would have been so different.
Yeah.
Right. So could you help us understand, like, if you wrote the book or performed the play by yourself, how radically different would it have been from the final product? And if you, Mysara, wrote it by yourself, how would it have turned out different? Yeah. And like, yet when it came together, what made it better?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where, like, what's the phrase? Like the sum is greater than its constituent parts, right? Like, I think it's really like, I think Brown as Haram exists only because like the both of us came together. Like, I don't think what I would have created would have been, Brown as Haram. It would have been something very, very, very different. I don't know if it's more or less, but definitely like different. I think I would have maybe, I think for example, something that we discuss, I think in the play is, we talk about gender a lot, right? And gender and race and how those two things influence each other. Yeah. And I think, I think our stories only, I think people responded to them in a specific way only because, our stories were put side by side with each other. Whereas if it was just like my story, for example, it would look radically different. I think maybe I would not have asked myself the same kinds of questions.
Yeah.
I would not have, the same kind of answers or the same sort of like hypothesis also.
Yeah.
But like, I think, that only happened because, we had those conversations together.
Yeah. Yeah, I was saying, like, I guess we don't know the effect of your book or your outreach now, but I do find it striking when you name it like, okay, like you kind of like have your own audience, right? Like same attracts same, like attracts like, right? So like what you put out there, other people like you, whatever that means, would like, oh, okay, I can resonate with that. Yep. And then Mysara will have her own audience, whatever that means. But somehow in that intersection of your friendship, like your two audiences, two buckets, right? Two wide buckets of audiences sort of can come together. And like it's in that intersection where we start to like actually like learn and evolve of like, oh, I didn't know there could be this aspect and that aspect. Yeah.
I think like also, I think if I were to like write it on my own or perform it on my own, then it would be very, I feel like it's going to be blindsided, right? It's not, I wouldn't say it's new in that aspect. I think whatever I write is not exactly new.
Yeah.
It's what Malay women have been talking about for a very long time. But I think with Chris around it, it's like that dynamic that we don't often get to talk about. But also I think on the creative aspect, because I don't know if people realize, but the way I write and the way Chris writes is very different, right? And I think putting it together has been quite interesting, because you have two different styles of writing.
Yeah.
But talking about like similar issues, right? So how do you bring it up together? So I think that was, I think collaborating with Chris also pushed me, or pushed my creative side to think further than how I usually would. Yeah.
Gotta shout out our other co-editor Yen also, who's the director of Brown as Haram also, and I think he also. I mean, obviously, because it is a play, right? I think like he had to also then like visually try and still, hold these two differences simultaneously, but then still sort of like show like a uniform piece also. So kudos to Yen.
Yeah, like it's. I mean, it makes me think of how like beautiful creative projects come out as a product of like a real like creative friendship.
Yeah.
Almost like this willingness to like give and take and evolve. Like I do need to hold on to my unique voice and experience and yet open up to your unique voice and experience. And then somehow in that intersection, like we're going to create something like we both could never have done on our own. It's I know it's like a bit of a parallel thing, but this conversation is reminding me of like the work of this marriage therapist called Terry Real. And he just wrote this book called Us, because he's trying to like push for couples to understand like, look, like you want to make sure your marriage like works out or your relationship works out. You have to remember like there's a me, there's a you, and then there is a unique thing called us.
Yeah.
And it's and it's like in a relationship, you can talk about me and then I can ask you about you, but there might be a missing conversation about the what's coming out from the usness.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? And it's so I don't know, like it's so beautiful, yet we don't see it yet of like what is the product or what can be produced from your personal and creative friendship, right? That's coming your way. I guess we've also been like sort of dancing around like the theme of like race, right? Which is the big theme of your book.
Yeah.
Right? So let's engage with that, right? Like why did you decide let's do this thing called brown is haram? Right? What does this brownness mean to you as an identity worth talking about? Do you identify with it? Or do you think it's a thing that needs to be talked about? Yeah. What's your relationship with this identity called brown?
I think like when you grow up, you're not like, okay, I'm brown, right? Like, when you're 5 or 6, you don't like, okay, I'm brown, right? It's something that you kind of like experience along the way, right? And then you're like, oh, there are people who view you differently. And it becomes even more, I guess, obvious when you grow older.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, I guess, for me, at least personally, an identity I've kind of like embraced. Yeah. And I think, it's definitely something we have to talk about, because I think that awareness also doesn't necessarily come quick. I remember like a couple of years ago, I bumped into a friend who was my primary school friend. And I think she's been keeping up about all the work that I do, on race. And she was like, I never thought about like, my experiences as a Malay girl back in primary school until, I see your posts and stuff. And then a lot of like self-reflection as well. So I think it's like an identity I embraced, but it was not something that I kind of like ascribed to myself at the start. Yeah.
I think I feel similarly, right? I think something that we say in the book is, I don't even know what we wrote anymore in the introduction, right? But it's like the brownness is as Mysara alluded to, right? It's not something that I think like that we have sort of like, that we've created within ourselves and now we're putting it out in the world and we declare that we're brown, but more it's a thing that has been put on us.
Okay.
Put on us, through the different experiences that we've had, or through the different emotions that we've made that we felt. And it's more about, I think, it's more about not necessarily about who you are, but who you are not, almost to a great extent. I think you're made to feel maybe marginalized or excluded, made to feel like you're not part of the dominant or in group. I think that's kind of what we are trying to do with the term brown. I don't think we are saying specifically that there is this new category, or that there is like that we must now all think through the lines of brownness and things like that. It's not necessarily that. It's really more a way for us to now talk about the differences, to now talk about how is it. Why is it that some people feel a certain way? Why is it that some people don't necessarily sense some of these things, or ever can go through their whole life not necessarily maybe feeling some of the things that other communities do? So it really is just a springboard to a great extent.
Right. So how would you engage with someone who says, I don't understand why you must use the identity brown. Isn't this idea from America? And it's their stuff, it's not our stuff. Why can't you just call yourself Malay or Indian? Why must be brown? So how would you engage in that conversation? How would you help them understand why this is important for you or what brownness means to you?
Earlier this year, I did an exhibition in Jakarta about race, about identity, and everyone there was so, what's the right word to use? Surprised that we have race on our identity card. Yeah, they were like, you have race on your identity card? I was like, yes, and they wanted to see like my IC. It's quite interesting because this idea of like identifying yourself by your race is not it's not common for people in most countries actually, right? And I think for me, I think how I would respond would really be, I think it's our right to kind of like process it, right? Or to kind of like respond to what has been ascribed to us. Right? And I think if you have you as a person have a bigger issue with the like, why are we using brown rather than what we are trying to talk about? Right? The experiences that people have been sharing, then I think that is something to talk about, right? I think this whole issue about using the term brown shouldn't kind of like eclipse the main issue that we are trying to talk about. Which is, the discrimination or like experiences that we have as like minorities in this country, right? It almost becomes like a, it sidetracks the whole conversation, I feel. I think it's a valid question to ask. I'm not going to say it's not a valid question to ask, but then I guess I would kind of respond back like, why are you asking that also? Like why is that an issue to you?
I would say that I think like it's not as simple as just saying that, you are Indian, you are Malay. I think I would say that. And I would also just like start from like my like sort of personal experience. And I know Mysara may have some similar experiences, but I would say like, my dad is Indian. My IC says Indian, right? But my mom is also Malay. But then, I think she grew up Roman Catholic. She was raised by her mom who was Catholic. And so like, also like I think has a very complicated relationship with her race. And my parents got divorced when I was fairly young, and so it was primarily raised by my mom and by my grandma. And so then does that make me more Malay than Indian? But then also I'm also very, very different from, I think, quote unquote, I think it's not it's not unfounded to say people won't necessarily see me and be like, hey, Malay. So like I think I think it's also different then, and and I think at least I'm maybe also a slightly more convincing example of how sometimes race is not as simple as we think it is in Singapore. And so then it is maybe a bit more productive, or maybe brown to some extent gives us a new way to talk about these things. And so then it's not necessarily, I think, us trying to just take something from like abroad and then put it here, but for us to see whether or not this thing can work in our context. And the hope is that the book deals with that, right? If they read the book, hopefully people see that actually we also don't really know what this means, right? We are trying to see whether or not it works, whether or not we can use this to talk about, the broader issues like Mysara said about discrimination, about, racism, about alienation, about exclusion. So to a great extent, it is not necessary that we are saying, now we must use this term. It's more like, can we use this term? And, I think, someone, asking like, why are you using this term? Why are you bringing it in? I think to be fair, like I think what Mysara said about like, I think most of the time people then use that as a way to not engage with the real issue. That's definitely there for sure. But at the same time, I think if it comes from a genuine place of curiosity, like what you were saying about like, why actually are we using this term? I think that's a valid question. I think that's a question that I think, I still ask myself. I think we ask throughout the book, and that's the whole point of the book also, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm picking out from this part of our conversation is, so if someone is listening right now and thinking, I still don't know how to navigate it if my friend has suddenly decided like, oh, I'm brown, and then like, whoa, then since when, then maybe the way to go in there is go in with like genuine friendship and curiosity. Like, help me understand why this is important to you. Help me understand what this identity means for you. And it's okay to share your own questions and curiosities. Right? But how would we help to keep each other safe in a friend-like atmosphere as we have this conversation? Like say I'm from the majority race, or from someone who like, I really don't know how to contend with this brown thing, right? But say they really want to like understand. How would this person be safe? Yeah.
I think being a minority, you kind of know when someone is like genuinely asking or someone is asking out of like malicious intent.
Yeah.
Right? I think we kind of already know. And honestly, I don't think a lot of like brown people will be like, if you ask a question, be like, why are you asking that? You know, like we're not, we do answer, right? Like I've had conversations with my friends who are Chinese about all these issues. My current full-time job, I've been there for like a year, and I'm like, we have 2 Malays now, progress. But like, before that, I was probably the only Malay person in the office. Yeah. And we have honest conversations, which I appreciate. And this was like, I think just before the book got launched, and they were interested and they asked questions. And I had a colleague who was like, can I ask a question? And I was like, yeah, sure, right? Yeah. And then you are the like, it wasn't a question, it was more of a statement. Yeah. He was like, you're like one of the smartest Malay women I know, Malay girls I know. And everyone else in the room who were Chinese were like, oh, you cannot say that, you know, it's racist. And I laughed, right? Because I knew that he was not saying it out of like malicious intent, right? So I just asked him like a genuine question, and he knew I was coming out of curiosity, like, how many Malay friends do you have? Kind of thing. So we had an open conversation from there. Right, I think we are able to, we know when you genuinely want to know, it's not out of like malicious intent. You shouldn't be scared to ask, you know, because that friendship is already there. Yeah. Right. And I think part of being friends is acknowledging that your friends have a different experience than you. Yeah. Right. And you also know that when they understand, you know, they genuinely would try and make things easier for you as well. Yes. Yeah. So I think that circle that I have, you know, there are circles where I'm probably the only Malay, but and they will ask me open questions, but I also see and I acknowledge that they are trying to understand, but also they take action to make sure that, okay, you know, like I don't have to go through certain things again, you know, or certain experiences again. So I think it goes both ways, really. Yeah. If you don't explain to them, they're not going to understand, right? Yeah. And when they listen, they know that, okay, this is not just for her to rent or to do the like label of explaining to me. I have to do something as well. Yeah. And then us in turn as friends, acknowledge and appreciate the effort that your friend has made. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I think this is where like I think the beauty of like art comes into play also. I think where like I think there are ways where we can maybe, you know, in different ways, I think, to engage in this conversation without necessarily having to always like quote unquote talk to someone. You know, I guess there is also, I think, a lot of value in reading a book or watching a play, because then you, I guess, get to process those things in your own time, in your own terms, as opposed to like, you know, if you're talking to someone, there is almost sort of, not pressure, but then you are kind of trying to figure things out as you're having the conversation. You're trying to process also while you're listening to them. And that can work for some people. And that's not to say that the thinking doesn't stop there. But then I guess when you are sitting with a book or when you're sitting with a piece of art, you at least then, I think, really have quite a unique experience of really reflecting on your own. So I think with and also then like I think art also just gives you an avenue to, I don't know, just sort of like, you know, there isn't necessarily all the time like clear cut thesis statements or like points of arguments or discussion topics in art, but then you like get the vibes, right? So like I think, and that's also like very, very important lah. So I think also the hope is that, you know, this book also can be educational to some extent, that like, you know, people can do or can start that processing and thinking through the book also lah.
Yeah. I mean, since you're bringing up art, I wanted to bridge this into some exploration of the identity of artists and activists, right? And creatives, since that was like named at the start and like coming out right now. Because when we talk about identities, we tend to think about like, the race, religion stuff, right? And I wanted to help also the audience understand that there is sensitivities even around professional identities, right? Especially, let's say, more like, I don't even know what's the word for it. Like some identities feel like there's a lot more vested into it. Like artists and activists, I think there's a lot of emotion, right? Inside that. So let's explore that. Like, do you define yourself? Would you identify as an artist? And I know you identify as a creative.
Yeah.
Like for you, why do you choose to say I am a creative? Because you both came together to create a piece of art.
Yeah.
True.
You know, Brown's Haram started off as like it's a performance lecture, right?
Yeah.
That's what you called it. Yeah. Right? Actually even that hyphenation is interesting because performance is the artist and lecture is like, I don't even know what you would call it. Right? Yeah. So why wouldn't you identify yourself as an artist? Or do you? Yeah.
I guess people have already started identifying myself as an artist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how does that make you feel?
Interesting. I think it's not like the first identity I would use.
Yes.
I think mainly because I feel like I'm still trying to like experiment and you know, not that as an artist you can't, but you know, I'm still trying to figure out the medium that I'm comfortable with, you know, or my style and things like that. Or essentially what my end goal as a creative is. I think I'm still trying to like explore that. I don't reject the term artist completely. You know, I do use it in certain situations, I think, where I feel like, okay, it's easier to just call myself an artist.
When you like have to write grants.
Probably. Probably. Or like, yeah. So, okay, people take me seriously, sure, give me the money. But yeah, I think creative is maybe the term that I'm comfortable with, but also I guess this question is making me kind of like question myself, like am I stuck in my like, you know, like safety corner? Do I need to like push myself a bit out? But yeah, I think it's mainly that, right? Like I like the idea that I'm still in this journey of trying to like figure out what my style is or what my medium, my go-to medium is, and things like that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I would not identify as an artist for like two reasons. I think number one, which is more just I think around just sort of like personal insecurities around like, me artist, no like like it's not like I'm like constantly like preoccupied with like art. I'm not necessarily always thinking about creating something per se, which makes me feel like, then can I really be an artist? And these are all just like I recognize also. I think to some extent people will be like, oh, what are you saying? Like I think these are definitely questions that I ask myself. But I think it's also linked to my second point, because I think for me, art, or like the works that I create, whether it is a performance lecture, whether it is this anthology, is really like a lens or a mode, as in like it's a way for me to think through the things or the issues that I actually care about or that I want to see change, which is why I think I'm more comfortable with the term, or why I would intuitively say like, oh, I'm an activist, or comfortable with the term activist, because I guess to me, an activist is about trying to push for change in specific issues, and I think I use art then to talk about all these things that I'm trying to push for change for. So art really is just a tool that I use, which is why then I think to me it's almost sort of outside of myself to some extent.
Yeah. So how might you react to someone who says, boy, if you identify, if you say you are activist, you create trouble for yourself. It's like very not a good identity to put on, right? So how would you make sense of that for yourself? Like, why might you choose an identity that may not necessarily be popular or welcome or understood? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also I guess I'm a big believer of like like the phrase like speaking things into existence, right? The more you talk about it, the more people get used to things, or the more meanings change. And I mean, I think that's also a difficult concept to sometimes get people to grasp, but like things don't remain the same all the time. Things change all the time. Meanings change all the time. Words change all the time, right? A word that maybe I think had, like a bad rep, maybe now is something that we are more comfortable using, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think the more also that I say that I'm an activist, and the more hopefully people realize that I'm kind of nice, maybe then they'll be like, oh, okay, I think they're all fine, but yeah, so I think definitely part of it is that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think I'm also quite comfortable saying that I do want to stir things up to some extent. I mean, I think that is something that I feel like I have felt as an impulse that I think I've felt for the longest time. I always to some extent want to see how we can improve things, see how we can make change, see how we can include more people. I think those are like instincts that I've sort of, I think my mom would say I always had. I don't know if that's true, but anyway. So I think it's also a process of me being comfortable with those things. And even though those things maybe are not things that we are used to in Singapore, I'm personally okay with it. And I think to some extent, that's okay lah. I think if there is like an old auntie or old uncle, I immediately say old. I mean, which is not true. I think that could be just people who are like, oh, they're activists. And if they don't like it, to some extent, I'm like, I mean, okay lah. That's fine. I think there are a lot of other people who are fine with me using it, and that's enough for me also lah, to some extent.
Yeah, and I want to put some words to help like the listener understand how to unpack what Chris was sharing. It's not so much like, okay, this is the part where I don't listen because I'm not activist, I'm not interested in this, but I want you to hear it from the lens of this is what it means to identify ourselves, like that there is a part of me that feels important because in it is what I want to do in this world, what I want to think about this world. And it just happens to like all come in this bundle deal, right? Which I will call activist, right?
Yeah.
And I want that to be known to you. And I'm okay that it's different. I'm okay that you are maybe not even that comfortable with that term, but I need to have it known because it's a part of me.
Yeah.
And to not make it known is to like not be allowed to be completely me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the sense I'm making out of it. Yeah. So in some sense, it doesn't really, it hurts, but it doesn't really matter to me whether you think it's better for me to call myself something else or whatever. It's like I do want to express like there is a part of me which is really cares about changing the world, and therefore I will name myself as an activist even if you don't like that term. Yeah.
I would also say this also sort of links back to what we were talking about at the start about like our pledge and this idea of being, regardless of, right? I think my sort of interpretation of this idea of regardless of is almost that you put aside these like very personal, deep convictions or compulsions that you have to express yourself. Which is to some extent kind of sad, and also like I think I don't know. I think there is. It feels to me so exciting to build a world or build a Singapore also, right, where we are all able to like, I think, fully embrace ourselves, as opposed to being like, hey, don't say that loud, because that one, is not maybe right, or like, that one has a bad rap or something like that. And I think to a great extent that sort of resistance, or the trying to like push down our identities to some extent, has put us in this position where there are groups of people who are trying to they are rubbing up against each other. And I think it's so different to build a society on pushing down differences, as opposed to like embracing differences. And I think maybe to some extent we have done more of the former, and I would like us to be doing more of the latter.
Mysara, it feels like you have something you want to say, or something you're putting together, because you look very thoughtful.
Yeah, I think, I think I was just like thinking about why I don't call myself an activist. And I think, I don't know, maybe I think on a more practical term, I feel like I have not organized enough to call myself an activist, right? But also I think, which is something I respect about Chris, and other activists, is that, in some sense, I think when you do work like this, when you organize, when you're on the ground organizing, it requires you to kind of put yourself out there, right? I think I was also just trying to think how I started getting into doing all of this. It's something that people always ask me, and I don't really have an answer. But my background has, like, I was working as a producer and journalist with the mainstream media. So it has always been behind the camera, right? And I think the past 3 years has been quite, I think, a shift, like I was interviewing people. I never got an interview before that. So, but also I think, it's quite interesting to see how the moment you are maybe vocal about a certain issue, people are like, oh, you must be an activist, which is not the case, right? Like people are allowed to be vocal. And I think that we should, I think as Singaporeans, start being comfortable, like I think speaking out about certain issues. I think the only time I've, in a sense, allowed myself to be identified as an activist was, I think, during the Ep2 activist like online forum. I think that was the only time when they invited me to be like a speaker. Like I'm like, okay, I will not like say that, oh, there's no activism in my work, right? Because I would say that I am pushing for change, right? I just personally feel that I haven't like reached that level yet. I think for various reasons, I think it's a conversation that me and my friends always have, which is, I think it's a different dynamic when you're a woman. And especially when you're a brown woman, right? It does get tiring to be labeled as like the angry brown woman, even though actually, like, you have, number one, you have a right to be angry, and number two, like, honestly, like, you're not always angry, right? Maybe you're like, this passion comes off as like anger, or it discomforts people, right? And I think over time, I've also am trying to learn to kind of like take a step back and just like prioritize, like, I think myself and my mental health, and then also like, I think there's an expectation, especially as like a brown woman, that like once you start speaking on a certain issue, suddenly you're an expert on everything, which is not true. Right. And then there's this
that's the only thing that you end up speaking about for the rest of your life.
Correct. Right? Like you're always speaking about like or Malay women issues, or like you're expected to talk about everything. Which is also quite problematic, right? But it's interesting, I think, to see people's like reaction.
I think all good things need to sort of like come to a closey close, and we're starting to like land the plane on this conversation, right? But what I'm really like getting from all this is how every one of us has so much, so many parts inside us. There's worlds of things going on inside us, and trying to make sense of it Like, what am I doing in this world? What am I experiencing in this world? What is the name of that thing that I'm doing in this world? And is that the whole of me, or is that a part of me? And it comes out as identity statements that we are playing around with. Like that's why I'm struck when you said my work is related to activism. I do activisty things, but I haven't yet called myself a activist. But there is a part of me that responds to activism. And I can sense that as if we embrace or acknowledge that there is that part of me, and I'm okay with that part. Then when I see someone else who, let's say, calls themselves that in a more big way, you would be able to look at them and like, that's okay. Because I'm okay with that part of me. I'm okay with that as a part of you. But it's not me. And are you okay with letting me have it as 10% of my personality while you do it 80%? You know, and to not judge each other for like, why aren't you 100%? You know, when it's like, can I be a 10% activist? So I feel all these different identities and the different names we give our identities is a reflection of our different values, convictions, desires, experiences, and what we want out of this world, right? And that seems to be maybe a gentler way to begin a conversation, which can feel very threatening. You know, like these conversations can feel personal because they are personal. They're part of my personhood. You know, and like how can we like create that friend-like space where I will share about me, I want to learn about you, and what's that helping me understand about like this us, you know? So if we could bring us back again to where we started, like how would you, at the end of this conversation, introduce yourself? Like, who are you?
Yeah, I would say that I'm someone who cares deeply about different issues. I'm someone who cares deeply about ensuring that everyone is included and that no one feels left out. I'm someone who cares deeply about the world that we live in and the world that we are leaving for future generations, and everything that I do, everything that I create, everything that I say is shaped by those beliefs. And I would say that I'm not very intimidating. I'm just very awkward. And I think people mistake those two things a lot of times.
Beautiful. Mysara?
I think I would say I'm a person who does believe that art can drive change. And that I'm a person with very strong beliefs. You know, and I like Chris to believe, you know, in wanting a better world. But also personally is still in this journey in trying to like explore and see what that looks like.
I think what I'm learning about myself in this conversation, so I'll also reintroduce myself. I think I'm someone who would very much love everyone to bother to hear what's underneath the initial sentences that people use to name themselves. You know, like, hi, I am a lawyer. Or, hi, I am an activist. Or, hi, I care very much about brownness. And to not allow those first sentences to become the be-all and end-all of how you choose to see someone else. Because I love the paragraphs that you just introduced into the room. And I'm sure there are volumes and chapters more, right? Of like all the parts that are truly like Chris and Mysara. Thank you very much for this conversation. And to close, we traditionally ask our guests to sort of like fill in 3 blanks, right? Yeah, just on instinct, right? So Mysara and Chris, what do you see as as your answers to this? Fill in the blanks. To be whole is to?
Be yourself.
Chris has gone into like, I've got so many things. Yeah.
To be whole is to be in community.
Ooh, and that links to our second question, which is a community that I am deeply grateful for, who always makes me feel like I belong. Who is this community for you?
I think the people that I do a lot of like environmental activism work with.
For you?
I don't have one specific community, but I think people who I work with will eventually become friends. Yeah,
I love it that we're circling back to the friend thing again. Yeah, and last one, like, is there a song or a thing that is very much a part of you? And what does that say about who you are? Or a part of who you are?
There's this line in Brown is Haram where I say, the more tattoos I get, the more I feel like I'm getting closer to my final form. So I would say that I think my tattoos are something that's deeply important to me and deeply central to how I show the world who I am.
Thank you.
I think now lately I would say it's my mom's recipe book. Actually, yeah, because like it's something that I look forward to when I go back home when I travel. Like it's my mom's cooking, and like I think there's this like urge in me now to kind of like preserve it and like learn from her. Yeah, because she learned it from her mom and her mother-in-law, right? So it's something that like traditions that I would like to like keep going. Yeah.
Thank you very much for bringing us and the audience listening into a world of things that you identify with. And I hope that listeners, you found like parts of it that you identify with as well. Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Yay.